Thanks, Matthew. Hey everybody, I'm Paul Shortley, the CRO of Relo Metrics. For those of you who don't know us, we're a sponsorship valuation company that we serve both the buy side and the sell side of sports, help determine what the valuation of different sports sponsorships are, and we're really advancing the cause of being able to bring more ROI sorts of metrics and performance metrics directly into this world, which is pretty lacking. I spent a lot of time with Nielsen and other measurement companies where we're pretty good at that, and we're trying to kind of advance that cause within sports. So that's just a little bit about us. What we're going to talk about today, we'll probably nerd out just a little bit, but Kristen and I are going to talk a little bit about kind of the general theme being around data and analytics and how that's really advancing the business side of sport. We've heard that through a lot of different presentations over the last couple of days, that how important analytics are becoming, being measurable. All these things are really important to be able to understand performance. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'd like to introduce Kristen, but I'm going to prompt her with a question as part of her response. So Kristen is a full funnel marketer with a passion for brand building and data. What attracted you to sports?
Oh, very good question. Hi, everybody. So nice to meet everyone. Thank you so much for making the time today and kind of braving this weather and all the craziness of Vegas. So appreciate it for you being here. What attracted me to sports, and really what I've followed through my entire career, is about being engaged with very fan-centric brands. What's so wonderful about working in sports in particular is that as a brand, you want to attach yourself to incredible stories. And sports already has those built-in, baked-in stories, and they're evolving and emerging on a regular basis. So to be part of that and to help make those stories flourish is pretty exciting and humbling to be a part of.
Well, this seems like a natural point to ask this question. I'll go fast forward a little bit, but then, what type of power does sports offer a brand that other forms of marketing really can't?
Well, Paul, I just said it, storytelling for sure. So I think when you think of sports and you think about, and I'll say particularly the Las Vegas Raiders, is that you've got this incredible rich history and these incredible stories of not just the players and the coaches, but the fans, people who have been fans their entire lives or generational, where their grandparent or their father or their brother also followed the sport, and they have that incredible personal connection to them, and that's an awesome responsibility to be a part of. So I don't take it lightly, for sure.
Before we talk about data, maybe we can talk about the Raiders brand a little bit. And as you and I were talking and getting to know each other a little bit, there were some surprises that some of the things that you guys are working on that I thought were really cool. So I can't think of another team that belongs in Vegas as much as the Raiders. So it seems like it's very brand fitting. I actually grew up a Chargers fan. I was a ball boy for the Chargers when I was a kid, so I was a huge, being a San Diego native, and that was the team that we marked our calendars off every year. They were terrifying, they were scary, they had the characters. Al Davis, of course, is a Maverick, was a Maverick in the NFL. So before we really talk about data much, let's talk about the Raiders brand. Describe the brand today and some of the work that you're doing, especially in the community, which I thought was really interesting.
Sure. One of the things that I would say about the brand is it has that incredible history and legacy. And when the Raiders moved to Las Vegas, it was about, bringing some of that edge, but also making it open to just many generations and making it more accessible. I think one of the exciting things about where the brand is headed is how we're telling stories of the players, how we're thinking about data and analytics, and how we're thinking of that next generation of fan who may come to the Allegiant Stadium, or who may watch it at home, or who may engage with us on social media. The average sports fan nowadays looks very different than it did 60 years ago, so it's very important that we're constantly thinking about how we evolve, how we show up as a brand, and how we create unique experiences and engagement opportunities for the very diverse fan base that we have.
And I mean, a brand like that, an iconic brand, I mean, carries a lot of responsibility, like you said. So, I mean, what is in your remit, if you could say, in terms of like evolving the brand, or you said, don't touch this to change this? I'm just curious, like, what that brand evolution looks like.
Yeah, it's daunting, and it's also an awesome opportunity, right, to come into something with such a rich legacy and history and something so iconic as the Raiders. But when I think about it, it's about how do we advance the fans here in Las Vegas? How do we create not just a community, but also that people feel attached to the brand in some way? And that could be that they may be a football fan, but maybe they don't have a team. Or maybe they're a fan of another team and they're looking for a secondary team. As we know, we've got a lot of visitors and we got a lot of transient folks here in Vegas. So that's very important as we think about the brand and moving forward. And one of the things I will say of our current owner, Mark Davis, that he always says, which is really an evolvement to what Al Davis used to say, just win, baby, is he says, just win on and off the field. So I think about everything that happens at game day, win or lose, but what also happens that we're doing on the business side is focusing on how do we show up in the community? How do we show up in what we're doing on a regular basis? And how do we present ourselves in the most, sophisticated and advanced technology? Because that's where the future's headed, and we want to always make sure that we're part of that and that we are staying relevant as fans grow with the brand and as new technology emerges.
And I mean, you guys are very active in the community as well. I think the last presentation talked a lot about doing well by doing good and kind of promoting your brand that way. I mean, what are some of those community activities that the Raiders are involved with?
Yeah, I love that you're asking that question, Paul. One of the things I'll say that's been so great is that the Raiders does an incredible amount in the community. From everything that we're doing at the stadium, we will be the first stadium in Super Bowl history to be 100% powered by renewable energy. So we're not taking against the grid, the energy grid of what will be output on Super Bowl Sunday. The way that we're connecting with audiences, I just attended a brunch this morning that we did in partnership with the NFL, which is on helping survivors of domestic violence, that we're working with local food banks for food insecure, that we're doing things that are about waste reduction, that we're engaging with most of the concessionaires and the places in the stadium are also local businesses, which is very unique to any other NFL stadiums in the country. So we feel like there's this incredible grassroots of what's happening in Las Vegas that we always want to make part of the centerpiece to everything else that we're doing.
That's great. All right, so let's nerd on data for a second. So, over the past, say, 2 to 3 years, I mean, what do you think the biggest advancements are in terms of like analytics, data, and then we can talk a little bit about how you're putting those to use?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, so I think in terms of the biggest advancements of data is just the accessibility and being able to measure so much. If I think back 20 years ago, you're like, okay, well, there's a billboard or there's a TV spot, and we're just going to hope and pray and say that we hope that we get enough metrics there. But now, today, I mean, we're measuring it based off of our operations, how we're running the stadium, for example, and how we're measuring sustainability, to hospitality, what's our speed of service, how are people getting mobile ordering, to also all of the things that we're doing from a marketing and advertising perspective of how are we making sure that the marketing that we're running, that we're getting the correct return on investment, or when we're working with our partners, how are they able to realize their sponsorship valuation? And so everything that we do has a return back to it, and that we can make that accessible to the partners.
That's great. And when you and I were talking, you talked a bit earlier about some of the advancements helping in personalization and building storytelling, and that helps the brand ultimately. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, as a marketer, how do you leverage the data to kind of segment audiences or start to think about the personalization and then to build experiences off of that? For
sure. Well, right, as marketers, we always say that we all want this full funnel approach when we're thinking about how do we advance our strategy, how do we reach the right audiences, for sports, I think there's a lot that goes into also the segmentation of that funnel. So it looks like multiple funnels or different ways or all different pathways to get there. But the very avid fan, what we call our most avid fan base, is called the black hole. And they wear the face paint and the spikes and the gear. Those are your very avid fans. Well, I'm not going to talk to them in the same way that I would talk to a very casual fan who's maybe just being introduced to the brand, or maybe they've never watched a game, or they're seeing us in the community where we're attending an event and handing them a t-shirt, and it's their first entry point into engaging with the Raiders. What does all of that look like? In a very different way, we have to speak and create an architecture of how you reach each of those individual audiences, and then how you move them through the funnel and the life cycle over time.
Okay. How do you measure the effectiveness of storytelling? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a variety of ways in which you do that. I would probably say that you use storytelling as your first introduction. I definitely see it as being, when you're thinking about storytelling, how do you advance and engage a customer? But then I think where the data and metrics come in is that you have to have a follow-up to that. What's the next engagement point? Even if I'm going to run a wonderful brand spot, I want to be thinking about what's the next action point, or what is it that I want that customer to do after that, and then how do I ultimately measure those results? So I think back to where we were talking about how there's a pathway to it, that you tell a great story, you engage that fan, and then ultimately maybe you follow it up with something that allows them to engage further. Maybe it's another piece of content. Maybe then you're asking them to subscribe to a newsletter or follow you on social. And you slowly kind of bring down to that point of activating with that fan, and ultimately increasing their affinity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about the fan, and clearly the avid fan is different from the casual fan. So who is the avid Raiders fan?
Well, I will say
By the way, those people scared me when I was a kid.
I know, but they're wonderful. They are absolutely wonderful. I've had a chance to meet with many of those folks and engage with them, and they're great. And I have some of my team here, and I know they've also engaged with them and can be a testament to how wonderful they are. Yeah, I love it. All the way back there. But I think, they're your bread and butter, right? But they also know when you're not being authentic or you're not being relevant, and they're going to call you out on your BS, probably the quickest and probably the most vocal on social media. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're not disregarding that fan base or doing something that makes them feel out of place. But then it's at times where do you want to bring that casual fan? So your question to who's the avid fan, I'd say those are the folks that are come to the stadium, they're season ticket members, they're in their spot, right? They're going to buy every piece of merchandise, they're going to engage with every piece of content. So it's just making sure that you're constantly giving them a great experience so that they want to keep coming back.
Yeah, 100%. Are there any specific creative executions to avid fans that you're proud of, and why?
Sure. I think one of the things that we did recently is we had, for probably one of the very first times, we had a photo shoot where we actually invited some of these black hole members to come in and be part of our marketing campaign, which was around There's Only One Nation. Our fan base we call Raider Nation, and a lot of other people may have used the nation, but we'd like to think we've been around 60 years. We've been using Raider Nation. When we say there's only one nation, we're speaking to not just who we are as an organization, but also our very unique and diverse fan base. And so when I think about that, and I think about the Raiders and Black Hole, it was having them come in and be part of that marketing campaign and being represented as the brand, because they are a big piece of the brand. So to me, that was something that was unique, authentic, and relevant, and was something that really only we could do because they're such colorful characters.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, it's stuff of nightmares for me as a 13-year-old. But Now I can appreciate them. I read a very interesting article a couple of weeks ago that was related to the Chiefs-Dolphins game that was on Peacock. And I think the key insight that I gleaned from that was that marketers are thinking less about eyeballs today and much more about behaviors in people, and getting that sort of first-party data, because of the streaming channel that potentially changes the game quite a bit. I mean, how do you think about having that first-party data or additional data, and how you think it's going to change sports over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it goes back to what I was saying of, 20 plus years ago, you might have a TV spot or a billboard and you'd say, okay, that's great, it went up and fantastic, right? But then there's nothing else maybe that builds to it. I think now it's about having that full pathway. So to me, whenever I think about whatever I'm doing from even the top of the funnel when it comes to brand awareness and it comes to engaging the audience, then what's that story and what's those other entry points that are going to relate to customer acquisition? That's ultimately, how do I keep talking to that fan? So, something like Peacock, or where you're talking about acquisition that allows you to capture customer data, is so important. I think first-party data is so valuable because before you ever spend a marketing dollar or do anything else, you're going to be hitting your organic audience first. Those that have subscribed, followed, downloaded your app, because you already have this rich level of data, which can also then inform your advertising strategy as well.
There's certainly a lot of advertisers in the room, so I wanted to talk for a couple of minutes about just working with partners. So, I mean, how do you connect back to corporate partners so they feel that the partnership is worthwhile, and what are some of the important measures that you use?
Yeah, I love that question, because if there's one thing that I love to do is sit down with folks and say, okay, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that your brand is looking to accomplish? What is it that let me share with you, what's our marketing strategy? What are we looking to accomplish? How do we find some common goals in both of those strategies to help advance the storyline of what we want to do next? Full transparency, I've been with the Raiders a short time. I've been with the organization a little under 6 months and started right at preseason into the full season and now Super Bowl. So it's been an interesting time for sure. But I even think about my previous background and all of the work that I've done, whether it's been in sports or entertainment. But I think where you create the most relevant, meaningful partnerships is when you can have the advertiser and the brand sit down and have a conversation about what are some of those goals. Like, what is it that advertiser is trying to achieve? What's most important to them? Because if I know that, then it's also about presenting opportunities to them that align with both common goals, and then that's a win-win for everybody.
So hopefully everybody works with their partners that way. One would hope. So what advice would you have for the advertisers in the room, as from the rights holder's perspective, to get the most out of these sponsorships? I mean, if you had a couple pearls of wisdom to squeeze as much juice from the fruit as possible, what is that?
I mean, I would say set up one-on-ones, like get to know your marketing organization that you're working with, or to say to that lead or that account representative, hey, why don't I tell you about all of the things that we have going on in our organization? Because I'm sure they'd love to know it, right? And vice versa. That is, it's not just about a logo slap or giving over a brand style guide. What is it that you're thinking about for the coming year? What is it that's going to be your strategy? How can the brand or the sponsor that you're working with help you advance that narrative? Because there's likely some common goals there. And I think being able to have those one-to-one conversations is really critical.
And as you look ahead and you think about how marketers can continue to innovate their marketing strategy for success, I mean, how do you think analytics is going to be playing a role looking forward a couple of years?
I mean, I think it's paramount. As I mentioned, whether it's operations, whether it's sustainability, whether it's advertising, whether it's sponsorship, data informs everything that we do. And so, sometimes there's the idea of, oh, well, we'll go off after our heartstrings or we'll go after that. But it's like, I don't proclaim to know everything about the fan base and everything about all of the different types of audiences that we're trying to reach. But data is going to help certainly inform my strategy, is going to help inform to make sure that I'm making relevant, non-biased decisions. So I think that's why it's so critical.
Thank you.
Paul, we have about, how about if I turn on my microphone?
There you go. I've only been broadcasting for 30 years. Good job, Eric. Paul, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'd love to open it up to questions if anyone has any questions for Paul and Kristen. All right, here we go.
Hi, Kristen. What would you say when you're at the UFC was the riskiest thing you ever tried doing, and what was the result of that?
Okay, so that's my previous background, is I was also at the UFC for 8 years. The riskiest thing I tried doing. Well, I will say we did a whole marketing plan, so I ran a little event called Conor McGregor. We used Fighting Boxing, and then we were also having to have the challenge of an event right before that, which was with George St. Pierre, which if anybody doesn't know George St. Pierre, he's a famous MMA fighter, was with the UFC for a number of years, and he was coming back from his debut. And guess what? Most of Gen Z had no idea who he was. So that was a pretty big challenge. So we said, okay, why don't we have, marching down Las Vegas Boulevard, a flash mob of about 20 people wearing karate gis, which, is like the white outfit and the belt. And on the back of the gis it says, whoisgsp.com. So again, thinking of pathways and how we create a story. It was, okay, this is odd, this is weird, what does this mean? But it's risky because obviously people who really know MMA know who GSP is, but then a lot of these fans don't. So it was definitely educating my leadership team on why to do this. And the results were phenomenal. Like there were tons of earned press writing about it, of like, who's GSP.com? Where are these people coming from? Why are they showing up everywhere? And then it led to us slowly getting closer to the fight and engaging them and ultimately getting more people to purchase the pay-per-view.
Do you have any good Conor McGregor stories?
Oh, so many, but I don't know that we have time for all of that.
A couple more minutes.
Is he as wild and outlandish in real life, or is most of that persona?
What I'll say is athletes in general, football players and MMA fighters have very unique personalities. I will say with Conor, though, he's 100% authentic.
He's my favorite. I love him. I would go see him fight any day.
Here's a question. How many emails would you get for one particular fighter or Dana?
Like in terms of people engaging.
Wanting a comment, wanting to ask your opinion?
Oh, all the time. And I'll say, like working in sports overall, any sport in particular, because prior to this previous life, I used to work in entertainment for NBC Universal, actually.
There you go.
Harry Potter and Transformers. Nobody's asking about like changing those stories, right?
Right.
But anything with UFC, anything with football, yeah, everybody suddenly feels like they're a coach, they're a commentator, they're going to tell you the best way of what happened on the field or happened in the octagon. So I think it's unique where you have a lot of people who are tacticians, if you will.
We got time for one last question.
It's going back to UFC as well. But since we're brand forum, and so we're just connected, I happen to have worked on sort of the transformation to Reebok, right? When first athletes had their own sponsors on uniform. How did that transform, and what was the importance of UFC going to that new look and feel with one unified brand partner on athlete?
Yeah, I think it adds the legitimacy to the brand. You don't want a patchwork. Prior to that, before there was a licensing deal in place, you had a little bit of the Wild West, where you had athletes trying to come up with sponsors and trying to create their own gear. And that meant for a whole mismatched approach, and also really tough from a broadcast perspective, right? Like when you think about TV test and you think about colors on screen, sometimes that doesn't play well when you've got all of these athletes out there doing their own thing. So it added a lot of legitimacy to the brand and ultimately I think led to bigger broadcast deals. And then most recently, UFC moved away from Reebok to Venom, and Venom is a MMA-centric sports brand based out of Paris. And I think that added another layer of really authentic gear that's created in mind with a fighter that only a brand that is that close to the MMA world would know.
Awesome, thank you so much. Give it up for Paul and Kristen.